Welcome to Identity Office Hours. This is really a special event to cover an announced security vulnerability called Blass Radius. I have as my guest today, Alan DeKok. Welcome, Alan.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And it's also going to be Open Source Underdogs episode number 71. So we're going to repurpose this content in two places, but I thought it was sort of a unique opportunity to cover a timely event about Radius, which I would say is identity related. And I wanted to start this episode with maybe a story that's going to date myself a little bit. But I actually got into the tech industry when I started an ISP in 1995. And we had bought for the company what we called a terminal server, which provided access to modems and ISDN modems. And that terminal server was connected to a Radius server. And that Radius server enabled us to control whether people could connect to our ISP service with their modem, but it also controlled things like, could they get one channel or two channels? Like, how are they provisioned? Could they get a static IP address when they connected? And also we use the output of that Radius server for billing because at the time, believe it or not, we limited you to 100 hours of dial-up. And so we use it for accounting. And I think people forget that accounting purpose is still important to Radius. So it was controlling access to resources. It was providing us billing data. And also to accomplish that, it authenticated a person via username and password. But maybe, Alan, this is a good time. You can give your history. 1995 was a long time ago.
Yep.
The FreeRADIUS project started in 1999. So what happened to you in that period, like before FreeRADIUS got started, and how did you actually get into this?
Yeah, so 95, I was doing a master's in physics, ended up getting a paper published, which is less important than it sounds. I was one author out of, I believe, 140 on a 60-page paper, and my contribution was literally one sentence. We measured this to be blah. So if there's a bar, as to whether or not you're a nuclear physicist, I'm 8 words above that for the one paper I published. That unfortunately didn't make money. I didn't want to do a PhD. So I ended up working for a local company here in Ottawa called Gandalf. They were doing terminal servers at the time, ISDN bridges and routers. And when they went under, I moved to another company doing token cards. I had done some Radius at Gandalf in 96 or so. At the token card company, we were using one of the first Radius servers, Merit, which came out of Livingston to a certain extent. And after various unpleasantries with Merit, we just couldn't get it to do what we wanted. We took a copy of the Sistron Radius server, which was a version of Livingston at the time, ported it to HPUX, IRIX, Windows, everything. And then when I left that company, I started up FreeRADIUS because I saw that no one else was really paying attention to the Radius market. People weren't accepting patches. There was 2 or 3 different open source Radius servers and no one was working on them. And so my thought was, well, if I work on it with a bit of energy and accept patches from people, it'll become the biggest thing, the best thing, and I can keep up some skills and have fun doing it. And 25 years later, it's now pretty much the biggest Radius server on the planet in terms of market share. And everyone else having retired, I am now the senior Radius expert. So that's been an interesting journey.
I think I read on the FreeRADIUS site that 100 million people connect to the internet daily using FreeRADIUS. And probably tens of thousands of organizations are using it for their network equipment.
Yeah, I'd say 100 million would be a low estimate. Practically speaking, if you're not one of the big 4 or 5 networking companies, they have all their own Radius server. Um, so if you're not one of those big 4 or 5 networking companies, um, you're gonna be using FreeRADIUS. So we also OEM the server. Pretty much everyone who used to have their own Radius server realized it's an esoteric market, requires esoteric skills. Um, they dropped their proprietary Radius server and are shipping FreeRADIUS. So HP, for example, Aruba, they do not have their Radius server. It's a version of FreeRADIUS. Lots of people are doing this, to the extent where even about 10 years ago, I was getting into an argument with one of these people at a bigger company, and he was trying to put me down for, running open source Radius software. Oh, I work for, multi-billion dollar company, and your stuff is smaller. And he was quite put out when my response was, oh, that's nice. How many copies of your software are running? Oh, I have about 100 times that. So to a first approximation, every single Radius server in the world is FreeRADIUS, and everything else is a tiny amount lost in the noise. He was not pleased with that. It's like, well, you started being rude, so you
It's
know,
pretty amazing, and, I think that people are starting to become aware of the ubiquity of some of these open source libraries,
yeah,
especially in the context of security vulnerabilities. Um,
yep,
I had a shitty car growing up, and every time something broke, I learned a new part. So that's
yep,
what the carburetor does, and I think open source is a little bit like that.
yep,
So I was interested about this particular announcement that we're talking about today called Blast Radius,
yeah,
because maybe it will help shine light on this infrastructure that maybe people kind of forgot about.
yeah,
But before we pivot into that, and maybe this is leading up to that, I wanted to just go back to 1995 a little bit
sure,
when 25-year-old Mike Schwartz is starting an ISP in New York City with his friends Eric Lagur and Gene Yu. And we bought our Max 4000 terminal server, and we need a Radius server. So I was talking with Eric Lagur today, and he said he still has the code that we ran in 1995, and he sent it to
yep,
me. And you can see this is Livingston code from 1992. And what's interesting to me about this in the context of today's conversation is that one of the libraries, C libraries here, is this MD5 library. So I
yep.
don't know. Just do you have any thoughts about this code or the origins of Radius?
Yeah, that is the original Radius server that started it all off. The story behind that was Michigan University had a bunch of points of presence all across the state. They didn't want to put copies of their entire student and staff database at every site. So they went to Livingston that they were getting their networking equipment from. And the Livingston people came up with Radius. It worked really well. Other people started implementing it. And within about, that was 91. And so in about 3 or 4 years, they pushed it to the IETF. People started standardizing it. People started working on it. Um, Microsoft had a Radius server. UUNet had a Radius server. Ascend had one. All kinds of different people had one. I was a little late to the game in 1996, 1997 to Radius.
I see. And yeah, and it looks like we were an Ascend customer, but it looks like they were using Livingston's
Yeah,
code. And the end of the day, Livingston AT&T ends up buying both Livingston and Ascend, so it
yeah,
doesn't really matter. Um, but so I wanted to pivot to this potential attack. So for all the people
yeah,
who are tuning in because they want to know about Blast Radius, let's cover that first, and then
yeah,
pivot back to I have some more questions about the business around
sure,
free radius and monetization and stuff
sure.
like that. Um, but okay, so in this particular attack, let me share a different screen and just say that the attack is based upon this MD5 um, um, it's really an MD5 collision. I
It's a
think the way you,
MD5 chosen prefix attack where you can create collisions at will. So
right.
the background is that for various historical reasons, um, some packets in Radius lack all integrity checks. The client sends the packet, the server receives the packet. Um, Anyone can mangle the packet on the wire. The server never notices. This was deemed to be okay by the various people involved for various reasons, which you can actually see in was it RFC 2869 section 7.1, because I've been looking that up recently. It says, yeah, these aren't, signed, but it's okay, it's fine. That was published in 2000 in part. Um,
Can I just interrupt for
yeah,
1 second and say, having worked in the telco industry for a while, sometimes we used to say, well, if the attacker's on our network, we got bigger problems. Do you
sure.
think that was
Um,
behind sort of the thinking?
no, the thinking was at the time, most of these authentication packets contain a password. The password is, let's call it, encrypted on the wire. The crypto people won't like that term, but it's good enough. Um, so nobody can see the password, despite what a lot of people claim. Right, this is not a clear text password going over the internet. It is protected. The crypto people can't break that. And the idea was, well, if anyone mangles the packet, they have to have the correct password anyways. Um, and so therefore mangling the packet doesn't really make any difference. And the genius of the attack is it bypasses all of that. So you don't need to have a user account on the system. You don't need to have a password. You can try logging in as X, password Y, mangle the packets going to and from the server, and lo and behold, you're on the network now.
I
So this
see.
is a very, very clever attack.
And the and we don't need to get into this, but basically
Yeah.
the root cause is that you can sort of make your own MD. The MD5 hash is supposed to be unique, but it's actually not. We can maybe make
Yeah.
another input value that
Yeah.
actually has that same MD5 hash
Yeah.
value, right?
So that's what that gibberish is in this slide. The
Yeah,
idea is if you have some known input, in which case this would be the reject that you're predicting the server sends. And the server sends almost always the same thing. So it's easy to predict. Um, if you can predict the reject, you have what the server sends, you have what you want to pretend that the server sends, your forged packet, and you do a whole bunch of crypto calculations, and you come up with this gibberish that you add to the packet, which makes the MD5 turn out to have the same value for both the reject and the packet that you want to send.
right.
So you can turn a reject into an accept, you can bypass multi-factor authentication, you can give the user any permissions on the network. It really is a complete bypass of all of the Radius security.
Right. And then I have the attack summary. And basically, in order to pull this attack off, though, just thinking about it mentally, because I was
Yeah,
trying to say, okay, can I get free Wi-Fi anywhere now? That would be
yeah,
cool. And so I was starting to think this through, and it's kind of a combination of, well, now that we know how to spoof or provide different response packets and make the hash work. We need to somehow be able to be a man in the middle and replace this response back to
yeah,
the server. And I was like, how do you do that? Like maybe you
yeah,
break into us. I'm thinking, okay, I'm the Byrne spy, fictional spy, Michael Weston, and I tailgate into a building and I connect my phone via Ethernet and I get into the phone closet and somehow I replace the firmware on the switch and I'm able to then now like see all the UDP traffic, and then somehow I filter that response out through UDP, and give my own response. So something like that is how it
So
would work.
yeah, that can be done. If your network is physically secure, this attack can be fairly hard to do. The whole man in the middle or on path attack, as some people call it, it's fairly hard to do. So you have to break into the network in order to do this attack.
You mean
But
physically break in, or
maybe, maybe not. It depends.
okay,
If
if
you
you can get
can,
on a switch, for example,
if you
then
can get on the switch, you can do
or a
this.
router maybe.
Yep. And this is where, security is always critical, right? If you look at exploits for browsers or something, right? Sometimes they find 5 or 6 different bugs. They attack the first one, which lets them attack the second one, which lets them
Right.
attack the third one, and then they
De-escalate.
have complete control over the machine. So even if this particular attack is hard to do, it has to be fixed because
Right.
otherwise people will use it to break something else.
And
That being
having run an
said, yeah,
ISP in the 90s, I can now admit that our router sometimes got broken into.
yeah.
So,
I mean, I was at one of the IETF conferences, probably 10, 15 years ago, where someone stood up at one of the open mic sessions and said, yeah, this guy works for a company who runs some of the core internet routers. And he said he'd log into the system and see another user account logged in. And he
mhm,
calls the only other 3 people that have permission to log in, and they all say, I'm not logged in.
right.
Who is this
Scary moment.
person? Nobody knows. So for the attack, right? The man in the middle sounds hard. It's not always hard. Sometimes it's trivial. So there are companies that are sending these radius packets over the internet, right? Whether it's some kind of cloud hosted system, something else, um, doesn't really matter. If your traffic is going over the internet, then there are potentially dozens, if not hundreds of people who can see that traffic and mangle it. Same thing with ISPs. A lot of ISPs buy connectivity from other people, and those radius packets then end up transiting multiple networks. So if you have 100% trust in everyone on the internet, then you're safe. And if you don't, um, then they can attack you and attack your users.
And okay, let's see. Well, I lost my train of thought here because I was thinking I messed up the captions on this episode.
No worries.
So
So
I'm still
there's a
in
lot to go
learning
on
mode
here.
on the live stream. Um,
Sure.
all right. So we talked about the attack, and it has to be patched. Um, and what was interesting is that maybe pivoting to the business side a little bit, I saw that InkBridge has released some tools
Yeah.
that allow you to detect if you're vulnerable to this type
Yeah.
of attack. Can you talk a little bit about that? It seems like as an open source vendor, it's an interesting product offering that
Yeah.
helps you add value to the large community of FreeRADIUS users out there. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit maybe about that product and
Sure.
how it helps you prevent or detect or something else to mitigate
Sure.
this attack?
Yeah, so we have effectively 2 different products. There's different variations depending. One is simple documentation and an Excel spreadsheet. Um, and the documentation is exactly how to upgrade your systems in order to protect from the attack. This documentation is vendor neutral. Um, So we're not going to tell you how to, you know, check boxes in Microsoft or Cisco. The difficulty with this attack is because it requires upgrades on both client and server, and it requires configuration changes on both client and server, you don't really know what to do first, right? So if you go to your vendor, they'll tell you how to install a new firmware. They'll tell you how to change the configuration settings, but they won't tell you the impact of that on your wider organization. So if you're a company wanting to know what to do, you can spend hours, days, whatever, trying to come up with a game plan to upgrade your systems. or you can just download our documentation and the Excel spreadsheet. You can work through and go, oh, I have these number of Radius clients, I have these Radius servers, this is what I've done to their configuration, I've upgraded these, and it will tell you whether or not your network is protected from the attack. That's the first product. The second product is a analysis tool, which will look at your network PCAPs or similar things, look at the packets, and then tell you whether or not your systems have been upgraded and whether they've been configured correctly. It can also send test packets to your Radius server and go, hey, you're supposed to, the Radius server is supposed to behave in a certain way. When I send test packets, it either does behave that way or does not. So the combination of the two tells you what you should upgrade, how to upgrade it, and whether or not it's been upgraded properly.
I see. And so if you were to upgrade your servers, would that mean your clients would still work, but
Yes.
and
So
then hopefully
that's,
you go back and upgrade the clients?
yeah. So the process is, a little scary, especially if you're an ISP and you have some BRAS or GGSN with 100,000 users on it. Upgrading them, tends to annoy the users because they often get kicked off. Um, the difficulty with the protection for this attack, it requires not just firmware upgrades, but configuration changes. What we've done is we've spent 5 months working with the cryptography researchers to come up with protections for the Radius protocol that close all the possible avenues of attack. So that's the crypto side. The practical side is the researchers don't know anything about Radius and they don't know what will break your network. So for me and my team, having done Radius for 25 years, we know what people do, and we came up with suggestions, which are now being mandated in the RFCs. This is what the vendor should implement. This is how these new configuration flags should behave. We got them approved by the cryptographers. And the result is you can have your client and server, you can upgrade one, your network is fine. You might not be protected, but your network is fine. Or you upgrade the other one. It doesn't matter because some people, their Radius servers are old and they can't upgrade them, or their networking equipment is old and they can't upgrade them. So the last thing I want to do is take your network down in the interest of security. So when you upgrade these systems, you can do it in any order. You may or may not be protected. Then once you're upgraded, you can set these configuration flags, which enforce the new security of the Radius protocol. So the client can say, I want the server to be secure. The server can say, I want the client to be secure. But you can't set those flags until the other side has been upgraded. And so that's where the documentation comes in, what to do, when, and why, so that you don't take your network down.
So I thought I heard you mention that you might be proposing some new IETF drafts that close
Yep.
some of these holes. I always mention to people that people think of IETF RFCs as being somewhat, static, but actually it's not. There's not one. There's a whole series of
Yeah.
RFCs that make a topology or architecture. So which draft is it that you're discussing at the next IETF meeting? I think coming up in Vancouver pretty soon sometime, right?
Yeah, 2 weeks. So the draft is called Deprecating Insecure Practices in Radius.
Yeah,
It
to the
covers
point.
this issue. Yeah, it covers this issue and many, many others. One is stop using UDP. Um, it works mostly if you're on an enterprise network and you're on a management VLAN. You can sort of squint and go, okay, it's probably okay. Um, if you're sending UDP traffic across the internet, this has been known to be bad for 25 years. Just stop it. So now there's a specification saying you have to stop this, which makes it easier for customers and vendors to stop these practices. Otherwise, people go, "Oh, it's allowed, right? Because it's not forbidden." Um, Another thing it's deprecating is MS Chap. There have been attacks coming out in the last 3 or 4 years where if I see that MS Chat data, MS Chat V1, MS Chat V2, it's all the same. If I see that data, then with a laptop and maybe a couple of billion passwords in a dictionary in an SQL-like database, um, I can crack your password in about 10 milliseconds. So I can turn that MS Chat data into the user's clear text password. So if you're using MS Chat for, an ISP or administrator login to switches, stop. Anyone who sees that traffic will get your clear text password. And there's a whole bunch of other things in that document that it's deprecating and pointing out that, this is bad or don't do this or you should move on to this. So that document has been ongoing for about 2 years now. The hope is to publish it as a internet RFC later on this year.
So what I'm hearing is that Radius is not dead.
Radius is far from dead. What I find absolutely fascinating about this is I got in as Radius was expanding. Within about 3 years of me starting, there's a lot of discussion about replacing Radius with Diameter. Diameter was seen as the next generation protocol, and it was supposed to stomp Radius into submission. That never happened. Diameter was only used inside 3G, 4G, 5G networks, and now 5G is moving away from Diameter to JSON over QUIC, so HTTP 3. So Diameter's dying. In contrast, if you buy commodity equipment, you go to Best Buy, you go to whatever commodity store, you buy your equipment off Amazon. If you're not paying $100,000 for a piece of networking equipment, it's going to do Radius, full stop. And so the Radius market is growing by leaps and bounds. It will never die. It will never go away. Diameter will be gone in about 10 years, I believe.
You know, I joke about this sometimes, but I feel like we're so siloed in certain domains today that people forget about the network. They forget.
Yeah,
Some people don't even really understand the basics of TCP/IP, even though they're doing software, because they never
yep,
have to deal with routing tables or BGP or
yep.
switches or any of this stuff. Do you think that that's maybe true about this? Why the impact for Blast Radius is so big is just we've forgotten about networks in general?
Yeah, the impact is large, in part because of history, and people have been neglecting radius security and other networking security for decades. I'm actually giving a separate talk about this at the IETF, looking at foundational protocols like Radius, DHCP, and other things, and how when people forget about them, your network is insecure. This is one of the pieces of feedback that the researchers got, um, when they were talking about their document, their paper, right? People went, "What? Radius? Does anyone still use that?" Um, and my answer is if Radius disappeared tomorrow, most everyone would be off the internet, right? So they had to update their paper to say Radius is used everywhere, ISPs doing DSL, fiber to the home, any kind of Wi-Fi where you're authenticated, captive portals, EduRoam, tens of thousands of sites across the world, um, smart meters, uh, aircraft, right? When the aircraft pulls up to the gate at the airport, there is an SSID just for the aircraft, and it connects to that over EAP using Radius, and then uploads its telemetry data about how the engines are operating and all of that. That is 100% Radius. I know that for a fact, having talked to those people and looked at that equipment. So Radius is used everywhere by everyone. Longer question, right? In terms of neglect, as part of this research, I looked into the historical archives. Unfortunately, the first record I can find of anyone complaining that these packets are not authenticated is me in 1998, right? It's terrible. But it gets worse because I wrote RFC 5080 in 2007, which is 17 years ago, saying, hey, you probably should sign these packets. And that's from the client. And on the server side, you probably should drop packets which aren't signed. Unfortunately, there wasn't consensus to make that mandatory, so it wasn't made mandatory. I put those changes into FreeRADIUS. So without really exaggerating, if everyone in the world had done what I suggested in 2007, this issue would be, oh yeah, you know that one flag saying be more secure? Go set it. Go for coffee. No, because people didn't do that, all the client equipment, all the servers other than FreeRADIUS are using 1991 security, and they all have to be upgraded. It's shocking. It really is that bad.
It's a widely documented.
1998.
So Blast Radius is a pretty cool name. Did the researchers come up with that, or who came up with that?
Yeah, the researchers came up with that.
And I'll tell you sort of a counterintuitive thing that we've discovered at Glue as a software vendor, which is that sometimes security vulnerabilities are good for business because our customers are more active in making sure that their binaries are patched when there's a high profile. So if there's a log4j or a heartbleed, then upper management is saying, are we patched for this? You know, because I see it in the news, even though there's an inexorable stream of CVEs every day. So were you weirdly happy about this potential?
Sad as it sounds, right? It was funny. I wasn't the first person the researchers reached out to. They reached out to someone at the IETF who went, I don't know, talk to Alan. So I was a second person, and it was a very interesting conversation because the researchers said, hey, we put a lot of work into this and we found this issue. Is it real? And I went, yeah, I've known about this for a long time, but thank you for proving it, right? I don't have the skills to go prove it. They went, okay, wow, that's good. How many systems does it affect? And I went, all of them. Every switch, every router, every VPN concentrator, every wireless controller worldwide. And then their jaw hit the floor and they went, oh boy, yep. They were also surprised that my reaction was positive. I mean, normally, right, if I reach out to you and say, hey, I found something terrible in the work that you did, people either get worried or scared or defensive. They tend to argue. But this, because I had been looking at it for 25 years, right? I was like, oh, good, you found this issue. Now you're reaching my agenda, which is making things more secure. Thank you. This is wonderful. So yeah, interesting stories.
Gotten some good take up. I saw Ars Technica article.
Yeah,
and I'm hoping
lots of
that
good articles.
More of the media picks up on the importance of this. We saw actually in the Heartbleed that the OpenSSL project, people looked at it and they're like, maybe this needs more funding. It's critical infrastructure. So, well, I'm curious a little bit about the business behind, or let's say the governance of FreeRADIUS and the business behind FreeRADIUS, your business. Let me start with sort of the governance side. So I saw that the copyright of FreeRADIUS is owned by the Internet Society.
No, it's not. No, the RFCs. So when you write an internet draft, that copyright is the Internet Society. The FreeRADIUS code is owned by me and whoever else has contributed.
Interesting. Well, I was checking the copyright on the FreeRADIUS copyright in GitHub. Okay, so you're saying that, so that's what I was getting at is the governance. So your company, which is InkBridge,
Yeah.
So there was a name change from Network Radius
Yeah.
actually owns the code and governs the code, I guess, as a
Yeah.
uh, what do they call it? Benevolent dictator. You're the benevolent dictator of
Yeah.
your. Is that
So there's a bit of a subtlety there.
mm-hmm.
Um, I started FreeRADIUS long before I started the company. Call me sort of the benevolent dictator, um,
In a good way?
in a good way. I'm a nice person, rumors to the contrary. Um, there's no official FreeRADIUS corporation. There's no, nonprofit. It's just the code is out there. If you contribute, I'm happy to put the code in. Um, I own the name, I own the domain, but past that, it's fairly loosely governed. Uh, the company is owned by me. I started that to do consulting around FreeRADIUS, and I've been fairly careful to keep the two a little bit separate. One reason I've seen is that often uh, companies get bought by other companies, and then whatever open source project that's out there ends up getting destroyed, or whatever, turn to the dark side kind of thing. And I don't want that happening. Um, so there is a lot of code in FreeRADIUS that's owned by the company. It's either been development that I paid for, or we've contracted through customers for. Um, the company offers services and support around FreeRADIUS, right? So the basic pitch is, hey, there's this open source Radius server. There's no license fees. You want to download 1,000 copies and run 1,000 versions of it on your network? Great, go for it. Um, but if you're going to build a complex network architecture of Radius servers and failover and databases, an ISP typically builds one of these every 5 years. My team does two or three a week. So who's going to be better at it? Who's going to be faster, cheaper? You outsource the design and the build to us. We turn over the running of the systems to you because that's what ISPs do. That's what ISPs are good at. And then we get support money from that. And then in terms of, go ahead.
Was the commercialization sort of an afterthought? Did you say, "Oh, we want to build free radius, let's do that," and then later on you said, "Okay, maybe we should start a company around this"?
Yeah. Yeah. It was an afterthought about 10 years later. I think I'm one of the few people that's actually making money off open source like this. Um, there are open source projects out there, which typically a lot of them are labors of love by people and they don't make money, or a company open sources something because they think they can make money at it or they want to get a better product. But there aren't a lot of things which started off from nothing as open source and then turned into a business. And really, the business for me was people were coming to me and going, I want support. Are you willing to give me support? Or I'm willing to pay for a new feature. Okay, if you give me money, I'm happy to work. Right. And now I have a whole group of people working for me.
Right. And yeah, so then that's the best way to start an open source based product is to build the community and understand, the demand out there, and before you actually dive in and start a company. So I fully encourage that. Quick pitch for open source underdogs. There's
Yeah.
71 company. You'll be company number 71 we feature. There's a lot of different ways people go about it and monetize. And so I don't want to oversimplify it or get distracted here. But I would just encourage people to go listen to some other founder first party accounts of how they use open source in their business model. Um,
Yeah, and,
I-
and and for me, to go on that, I found that it's a very, very different skill than software. I mean, people work on open source because they love it. They like to do problem solving. It's the engineering mentality. But if you're going to build a business, that's a fundamentally different thing. You need a different set of skills. Um, you need to be able to say no to people, right? You need to be able to look at a contract and go, hey, you're paying me whatever, $10,000 for that. I can't afford to do it because it's going to cost me 20 in work. Or you're going to change your mind halfway through and then not pay me. So you have to be able to qualify the customers. Um, you have to be happy going after customers, and you have to be, you have to know how to do a good pitch, right? So the little pitch I gave earlier, you do one of these every 5 years, my team does 3 a week. Doesn't even matter what the technology is. Anyone can understand that pitch, and most importantly, your CEO can understand that pitch, even though he doesn't know anything about Radius, and that makes it easier to sell.
Yeah, you need actual business value and unique selling proposition, and all the laws of
Yeah,
gravity of business still apply.
yeah,
I
yeah,
wanted to ask you a tactical question. Um, there was a name change in there. You're now
yeah,
CEO of InkBridge
yeah,
Networks, and there was previously another company, I believe Network Radius.
yeah,
Can you talk about why the name change?
sure.
And um, yeah, please.
So Network Radius was just, I mean, I didn't know anything about marketing. I picked a name, created a company. It's okay. People were getting confused about free radius versus network radius versus, is it radius networks? Um, Plus, a lot of the pitch we had was, we will configure free radius for you in your environment. Um, that's an okay pitch, but what certain customers hear is they're hiring me. The end result is what they own, or they own the end result. Um, we are contractors for hire, and that we should shut up and sit in the corner and do as we're told. Uh, that doesn't work really well when, in fact, what we were selling is a product, which is you can download free radius. Good luck getting it to work. If I want to be slightly negative, um, the product we're selling was all the tooling and support and scripts and monitoring and configuration around that. So it's the difference between, think of a car, right? If you get the engine for free, you still need the rest of the car. And depending on your needs, you might need a pickup, you might need an SUV, you might need a truck. Those were the products that we were selling, and it was a very difficult message to get across to the customers. So by changing the name, it becomes easier to say, look, we're selling a product. It's a radius server. Somewhere in there is this free radius stuff. Don't worry about that. We're selling you a radius server, which is a packaged box, which has a set of features. Um, and we found that is easier for people to understand. Plus, as time has gone on, um, I guess I've sort of expanded the scope of what we do. So FreeRADIUS version 4, which will come out real soon now, um, that supports radius. Great, it's always done radius. It will do DHEPv4. It will do DHEPv6. It will do DNS. It will do TACACS. It will do LDAP synchronization of all things. Um, and those were added partly because of interest from us and from our customers. So we're no longer selling just a Radius product. We have a DHCP server that'll do 10 or 20,000 leases a second, right? Not much out there will do that. And so we have all kinds of customers that love that. They go to other companies and they get paid, quoted either enormous amounts of money or very low rates. And for us, 10,000 a second for DHCP is like, yeah, you install it, that's what you get. So we've been able to expand our product offerings and increase our revenue as a result of that. And I think the name change has been critical.
So, so InkBridge Networks provides a lot of the development resources for the innovation, and it sounds like also for the maintenance of the
Yeah,
software. As I mentioned before, there's all these CVEs that need to be patched.
yeah.
People need scan their software every month. Um, is it mostly InkBridge engineers who are doing that, or do you see any significant PRs from the community into the Free Radius project?
We get some help from the community. Right there. Um, there was a significant amount of help very, very early on from the community. That's when people really didn't know what open source was, and people were confused. Like, why would you contribute to an open source project? You're giving away your engineering time, right? And the answer is very simple. You can pay $100,000 for a commercial product, or you can have one of your team members work for a week or two to add the features you want, and then you get the software for free. There's no question. In the last 5 to 10 years, FreeRADIUS has gotten feature rich enough that it does pretty much what everyone needs it to do. So the contributions from the community have gone down a bit over time. We get feature patches and bug fixes, but there's no major architectural changes. Um, at the same time, I must admit what we've done is we found the people who are giving us major feature changes and feature patches, and we've hired them, right? Why would I train someone in FreeRADIUS when they already know what it is, what it does, and I can just hire them and have them work for me? And that's worked very well. So yeah, at this point, probably 95% of the code is written by the company.
Do you think that there's a freeloader problem at considering how many people are getting value out of the software compared to how many people, how many companies and governments, telcos, banks, and other multinational corporations are getting value? Do you think there's a freeloader problem where companies aren't contributing back to
I,
maintenance?
I think there is. I mean, if you're an ISP or someone who needs the product, the GPL is what it is, right? To a certain extent, you're perfectly welcome to use it. That's the point of an open source project like this. Everybody's contributed, everyone gets the results back. The difficulty I have is there is a certain mindset, some potential customers, some users of FreeRADIUS, or people who use it in their products, where they have this mindset that because they have, quote, a company, right, or big money, big business, they are the geniuses, and everyone else is just some, stupid open source people sitting in their parents' basement. Um, and if they want something, they demand bug fixes, they demand fixes, they demand feature changes, and at the same time, they have almost religious objections to giving anything back. Like I've talked to, I don't know how many companies that end up paying someone to basically create their own proprietary fork of FreeRADIUS, right? They want a feature, they don't want to give it back because it's a competitive advantage. It's like, well, you're selling widgets, right? Giving away the radius code is irrelevant. No, 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 they own it. It's theirs. So they add a feature, and then they add another feature, and then they add another feature. And 5 or 6 years later, the people who added those features left. FreeRADIUS keeps going in the meantime, maybe adds those features in a better way that's more compatible, and now they're stuck with effectively a proprietary server that they have to open source because it's GPL'd, but it's useless to everyone else because the code is terrible and no one at their company knows anything about it, right? It's a disaster. Whereas all they had to do was go, I need this feature. It'll take, one of my engineers a couple of days to implement it. We'll throw it over the wall at the FreeRADIUS people. If it works, if it's good for other people, they will integrate it into the main release. And now we get that feature supported for free by the community. And we've done this with dozens of features. There are companies willing to do this. We work with them today. It's very, very positive. And there are other companies who absolutely refuse to do this. And in the long term, it ends up costing them enormously.
Well, we're coming up on the end. I like to keep these around 45 minutes because I feel like
Sure.
people, let me just do a quick chat on the chat. Okay. Well, any final thoughts on Blast Radius or InkBridge. Any final thoughts before
Sure.
we call it?
So short answer for Blast Radius, don't panic too much. You do have to upgrade everything. You don't have to do it immediately today. But if you go to inkbridgenetworks.com/blastradius, there's all kinds of tools there which will help. And that'll make your life easier, and it will be cheaper and faster than trying to come up with this yourself. Because I've been doing this for 25 years. I don't think anyone else has been.
Okay, and so the next episode is tomorrow. It's deploying passkeys for high security use cases with Rolf Linderman from Knock Knock and John Bradley from Ubico. So I encourage everybody to join us tomorrow, which is a very short turnaround for this live stream. Thank you all to the audience for joining us. Thank you, Alan, so much for sharing your experience, the history, and educating us about this Blast Radius vulnerability.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
Okay, and I just want to remind the audience to please follow Identerati Office Hours on LinkedIn. We're trying to get to 1,000 followers, and you'll be invited to great exclusive Identerati events if you follow it, so please follow. And thank you for joining us, and audience,